Every mistake you regret started as an impulse you didn't control. You spoke too fast, you reacted too emotionally, you chose comfort over discipline. This audiobook is not here to motivate you. It is here to condition you, to teach you how to pause when others panic, to restrain yourself when others collapse into impulse. If you control your impulses, you control your decisions. If you control your decisions, you control your life. If you don't, your urges will decide everything for you. Listen carefully. This is Impulse Control Training. Chapter 1. Your impulses are running your life. Most people think they are in control. They believe they choose what they do. They believe their decisions are rational, thought out, intentional. That belief is false. What actually runs most lives is impulse, unexamined urges, emotional reactions, the need for comfort, the need to respond, the need to feel something now. And here is the uncomfortable truth you need to hear early in this audiobook. If you didn't choose it consciously, you didn't choose it at all. That's the key. Look at your daily behavior, not your goals, not your intentions. Your behavior, what you spend money on when you feel stressed, what you say when you feel disrespected, what you avoid when something feels difficult, what you reach for when boredom appears. Those patterns are not accidents. They are impulses running on autopilot. You didn't decide to scroll for an hour. You didn't decide to snap in that conversation. You didn't decide to delay the work that matters. You reacted. And reaction is not control. You have a choice. But only if you slow down enough to see it. Most people never do. They live inside impulse loops and call it personality. That's the problem. Impulse feels personal. It feels justified. It feels like this is just how I am. But impulse is not identity. Impulse is conditioning. That's the key. Every time you act on impulse, you reinforce it. Every time you reinforce it, it becomes faster, quieter, harder to notice. Until one day, you look at your life and wonder how you ended up here. Let's be specific. Emotional spending is impulse. You feel pressure, stress, insecurity. So you buy something. Not because you plan to. Not because it aligns with long-term goals, but because it offers immediate relief. Reactive arguments are impulse. Someone says something that hits your ego. Your mouth moves before your mind does. You feel right for a moment and regret later. Procrastination is impulse. You avoid discomfort. You choose ease over effort. Not consciously, automatically. Instant gratification habits are impulse. Food, entertainment, distraction, all chosen to escape the present moment. And here's the pattern you need to understand. Impulse always trades the future for the present. That's the exchange. You have a choice. Present relief or future control. Impulse or discipline. Most people don't even realize they're choosing. That's the danger. If you didn't choose it consciously, you didn't choose it at all. Say that again internally. Let it settle. Because once you accept that truth, something shifts. You stop blaming circumstances. You stop blaming people. You stop telling yourself stories. You start observing. Observation is the first form of control. Right now, you're not being asked to fix anything. You're being asked to notice. Notice how quickly urges appear. Notice how often your body acts before your mind engages. Notice how discomfort triggers movement. That awareness alone is disruptive. It slows the process. That's the key. Most people try to overpower impulses with motivation. That fails. Motivation is emotional. Impulse is emotional. Emotion doesn't defeat emotion. Discipline does. And discipline starts with separating urge from action. An urge is just a signal, a sensation, a pressure. It is not a command. But if you've never practiced restraint, it feels like one. You have a choice. You don't need their permission. Not your emotions. Not your habits. Not your pasts. You don't need to act just because you feel like acting. You don't need to speak just because something rises in you. You don't need to move just because stillness feels uncomfortable. That's not strength. That's reactivity. And reactivity makes you predictable. Predictable people are easy to control. By environments, by people, by pressure. That's why impulse control is not a nice-to-have skill. It's foundational. If you can't control small urges, you will never control big outcomes. Think about that. Every major failure starts small. A small avoidance, a small indulgence, a small reaction that felt harmless. Over time, those small moments stack. They compound. They shape identity. Not because you chose them, but because you didn't interrupt them. That's the work now. Interruption. You're not here to suppress emotions. You're here to outlast them. Urges rise. Urges fall. If you don't move, they pass. That's a skill. And like any skill, it can be trained. But before training comes honesty. Right now, your impulses are running parts of your life. Maybe large parts, maybe small ones. Either way, awareness is non-negotiable. You have a choice, not later. Now, you can continue letting impulses decide, or you can start deciding deliberately. It's not about willpower. It's about awareness and restraint. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency. And it's not about who you want to be. It's about who you are when no one is watching. If you didn't choose it consciously, you didn't choose it at all. Remember that. Because in the next chapter, we're going to confront why impulse feels so good in the moment, and why that pleasure is exactly what keeps people trapped. You're starting to see the pattern. Now let's expose it. Chapter 2. Impulse feels good until it destroys you. Impulse always comes with a reward. That's why it works. If impulse felt bad immediately, no one would struggle with it. If reacting caused instant pain, people would stop. If avoidance burned right away, procrastination wouldn't exist. But impulse doesn't punish you up front. It comforts you first. That's the trap. Impulse gives relief, a release, a hit of calm, pleasure, or justification. And your nervous system learns fast. You feel stress, impulse offers escape. You feel pressure, impulse offers distraction. You feel insecurity, impulse offers validation. That's the exchange. Short-term comfort for long-term damage. That's the key. Most people think their problem is lack of discipline. It's not. Their problem is that impulse works in the moment. It lowers tension. It soothes discomfort. It gives you a sense of control, briefly. But control borrowed from impulse always comes with interest. Let's make this clear. Impulse never solves the problem. It pauses it. It delays it. It hides it. And whatever you hide grows stronger. You have a choice. You can take relief now and pay later, or you can tolerate discomfort now and gain control later. Most people choose relief, not because they're weak, but because they don't understand the cost. That's why this chapter matters. Impulse teaches your brain a dangerous lesson. Avoid discomfort at all costs. Once that lesson is learned, discipline feels threatening. Stillness feels unsafe. Effort feels unnecessary. And suddenly doing the right thing feels harder than doing nothing. That's not laziness. That's conditioning. That's the key. Think about emotional eating. You're not hungry. You're uncomfortable. Food becomes regulation. Not nourishment, regulation. Think about scrolling. You're not interested. You're restless. The phone becomes sedation. Think about reactive anger. You're not defending truth. You're defending ego. The outburst becomes emotional anesthesia. Impulse doesn't make you feel better. It makes you feel less tension, less pressure, less awareness. And that's why it's addictive. You have a choice. You can numb yourself, or you can train yourself. But you cannot do both. Here's what most people miss. Impulse shrinks your tolerance for discomfort. Every time you escape discomfort, your threshold lowers. What used to be manageable becomes unbearable. What used to be effort becomes overwhelming. That's how people become fragile, not through trauma alone, through constant avoidance. That's the key. Discipline works in the opposite direction. It expands tolerance. It teaches your nervous system. I can stay here. I don't need to move. I don't need relief. That's power. But power is uncomfortable at first. That's why impulse feels like the enemy of discipline, because it is. Impulse says, act now. Escape now. Say something now. Discipline says, wait, hold, stay. And staying feels threatening if you've never practiced it. That's why this audiobook keeps repeating the same truth. You have a choice, not between pleasure and pain, between control and chaos. Impulse feels good, but it teaches weakness. Discipline feels hard, but it builds capacity. That's the trade, and no one escapes it. Look closely at people who can't sit still, who can't focus, who can't tolerate silence. They're not broken. They're undertrained. Their nervous systems have been rewarded for fleeing discomfort for years. That's not solved by motivation. That's solved by reconditioning. You don't need their permission, not your urges, not your habits, not your emotions. You are allowed to feel discomfort and do nothing about it. That sentence alone changes everything. Because most impulses only exist because you believe they require action. They don't. An urge rises. You notice it. You don't move. That's it. No suppression, no fighting, no distraction, just restraint. That's the skill. Impulse peaks, impulse fades, And every time you outlast it, something important happens. Your brain learns a new rule. Discomfort is survivable. That's the key. Once that rule installs, discipline stops feeling heroic and starts feeling normal. You stop needing relief. You stop chasing escape. You stop bargaining with yourself. Because you trust your ability to endure. That trust is mental toughness. Impulse feels good until it destroys your patience, your focus, your self-respect. And here's the part people don't want to hear. Most regret is not caused by bad intentions. It's caused by good feelings chosen at the wrong time. Comfort instead of consistency. Expression instead of restraint. Relief instead of resolve. You have a choice. Every time, even now. You don't need to eliminate impulse. You need to stop obeying it. It's not about force, it's about delay. And delay is where control lives. That's the transition. Because in the next chapter, we're going to focus on the single skill that interrupts impulse every time. Not motivation, not willpower, but something far simpler and far more powerful. You're learning to slow down. Now let's name it. Chapter 3. Pause is power. Impulse survives on speed. The faster you move, the less control you have. The slower you move, the more power you gain. That's the truth most people never learn. They think power is action. They think speed is confidence. They think immediate response equals strength. It doesn't. Speed without control is chaos. Speed without awareness is reactivity. Speed without pause is impulse in disguise. That's the key. The pause is not weakness. The pause is not hesitation. The pause is not fear. The pause is dominance over yourself. Every impulse demands immediacy. Do it now. Say it now. Fix it now. Escape now. Impulse hates delay because delay exposes it. You have a choice. Between urge and action, there is a gap. That gap is small, sometimes only seconds. But that gap is everything. That gap is where control lives. Most people never experience that gap consciously. They move straight from feeling to doing, from emotion to action. No pause, no awareness, no decision, just reaction. And reaction feels automatic because it has been practiced thousands of times. That's the key. The pause feels uncomfortable at first. Your body tightens. Your mind pushes. Your emotions escalate. That's not danger. That's withdrawal. You're interrupting a pattern. Think about how often you feel the urge to respond immediately, to explain, to defend, to justify, to distract yourself. Those urges are not emergencies. They are habits asking to be fed. The pause starves them. You don't need their permission, not the urges, not the emotions, not the pressures. You are allowed to wait. Waiting is a skill, and like every skill in this audiobook, it improves with repetition. That's the key. Pause before you speak. Pause before you spend. Pause before you reach for comfort. Pause before you react emotionally. You don't need to decide what to do yet. You only need to decide not to move immediately. That's it. That single decision dismantles impulse. Most people try to replace impulse with a better action. That fails. Because you're still acting emotionally, just in a different direction. Pause is neutral. Pause is clean. Pause creates space. Space allows choice. You have a choice. Let's be practical. When someone provokes you, your body reacts first. Heart rate increases. Jaw tightens. Thoughts speed up. That's the moment. Instead of responding, you pause. You breathe once, slowly, not to calm yourself, to buy time. That breath creates distance between feeling and action. Distance creates clarity. That's the key. When you feel the urge to escape discomfort, scrolling, snacking, avoiding work, you pause. You don't negotiate. You don't justify. You just wait. 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute. The urge will peak. Then it will fall. Every urge does. Impulse feels permanent because you've never stayed long enough to watch it fade. Once you do, something important changes. You stop fearing urges. You stop obeying them. That's mental toughness. Mental toughness is not forcing yourself forward. It's holding yourself still. Stillness under pressure. That's rare. That's valuable. That's power. The pause retrains your nervous system. It teaches your body. I don't have to act to survive. I can feel this without escaping. I can remain composed. That's the lesson. And every time you pause instead of react, that lesson strengthens. Small pauses create large control. That's the key. You don't need to pause forever. You just need to pause long enough for emotion to lose control of the steering wheel. Then you decide. And when you decide from clarity, your actions change. Your words change. Your spending changes. Your habits change. Not because you forced them, but because you weren't rushed. Rush is the enemy of discipline. Impulse loves urgency. Discipline loves time. You have a choice. Most people rush because they're afraid of discomfort, afraid of silence, afraid of tension. But tension is not danger. It's information. It tells you where your training is needed. That's the key. Every time you pause and stay, you build capacity. Capacity to tolerate pressure. Capacity to tolerate uncertainty. Capacity to tolerate emotion without collapse. That capacity is what separates controlled people from reactive ones. Controlled people are not calmer by nature. They are slower by training. They don't give immediate access to their reactions. They don't reward every feeling with movement. They pause. And because they pause, they see options others miss. Options are power. You don't need to announce your pause. You don't need to explain it. Silence is enough. Silence often unsettles others because they're used to controlling people through urgency. The pause breaks that. That's why this skill changes everything. But pause alone is not the end goal. Pause is the doorway. What comes next is deciding in advance how you operate, so impulse doesn't get a vote later. That's discipline, and that's where we're going next. You've learned to slow down. You've learned to create space. Now it's time to remove emotion from decision-making entirely. Chapter 4. Emotional impulses make you predictable. Predictability is the real danger. Not emotion itself, predictability. When your actions are driven by emotion, you can be read. When you can be read, you can be managed. When you can be managed, you are no longer in control. That's the truth. Most people think manipulation requires intelligence or strategy. It doesn't. It only requires emotional predictability. If someone knows what triggers you, they don't need power. They just need timing. That's the key. Every emotional impulse you act on broadcasts information. What bothers you? What excites you? What makes you defensive? What makes you rush? And people are always watching. At work, in relationships, online, in negotiations. Not consciously, instinctively. You have a choice. You can leak your emotional patterns, or you can contain them. Containment is control. Let's break this down. When someone provokes you and you react immediately, they learn something. When criticism makes you explain yourself, they learn something. When praise makes you relax discipline, they learn something. Over time, your behavior becomes predictable. Push here, reaction. Withhold here, insecurity. Praise here, compliance. That's how people lose leverage without realizing it. That's the key. It's not about becoming cold or robotic. It's about becoming unreadable. Unpredictability is not chaos. It's restraint. It's the discipline of not showing your hand. Most people reveal everything because they feel entitled to expression. They believe every feeling deserves an outlet. It doesn't. Expression without control is exposure. You don't need their permission, not your emotions, not other people's. You are allowed to feel something and keep it to yourself. That ability alone separates amateurs from professionals. Watch high-level performers, leaders, negotiators, calm individuals under pressure. They feel the same emotions everyone else feels. They just don't leak them. That's the key. Emotion is information. Impulse is action. You are allowed to collect information without acting on it. When you don't react immediately, something interesting happens. The situation reveals itself. People talk more. Pressure shifts. Intent becomes clearer. While others rush to fill silence, you gain data. Data is leverage. Predictable people move fast. Controlled people move last. And moving last often means moving best. You have a choice. When someone tries to rush you, you slow down. When someone tries to provoke you, you pause. When someone tries to pull you into emotional chaos, you stay neutral. That neutrality unsettles people who rely on emotional control because they can't read you. That's the point. Let's use a real example. In an argument, the first person to lose emotional control loses position. They raise their voice. They explain too much. They defend. The calmer person sets the frame. Frame control is everything. Emotion-driven people fight content. Controlled people manage context. That's the difference. And this is where discipline shows up again. It's not about winning every interaction. It's about not losing your position. Once you lose position, you start compensating, over-explaining, justifying, seeking validation. That spiral starts with impulse. That's the key. Most people believe authenticity means emotional transparency. It doesn't. Authenticity means alignment with your values, not obedience to your feelings. Your values require restraint. Your impulses demand release. You have a choice. Which one runs you? Predictability doesn't only affect social situations, it affects habits. If your brain knows you will always escape discomfort the same way, it will keep pushing that button. Food, phone, avoidance, anger. Same trigger, same response. That loop is predictable, and predictable loops are easy to reinforce. Breaking predictability starts with one simple rule. Do not respond the same way twice. Pause. Change timing. Change pattern. Even small changes disrupt impulse loops. That's the key. You don't need to announce your control. You don't need to explain your silence. Silence is already a signal. It says, I'm not rushed. I'm not reactive. I'm deciding. And when people sense that, dynamics change. Pressure decreases. Manipulation weakens. Respect increases. Not because you demanded it, because you earned it. You have a choice. You can be emotionally obvious or strategically quiet. The people who win long-term choose quiet discipline. But quiet discipline requires preparation. You cannot rely on emotion to guide you in critical moments. You must decide in advance how you operate. That's what discipline actually is. And that's where we're going next. You've learned to pause. You've learned to contain. Now it's time to remove emotion from decision-making altogether. Chapter 5. Discipline is deciding in advance. Discipline is not what you do in the moment. Discipline is what you decided before the moment arrived. That's the distinction most people miss. They think discipline is willpower. They think it's about fighting urges when they appear. They think it's about being strong in the moment. That's wrong. If you wait until the moment, you've already lost leverage. That's the key. Emotion is loud in the moment. Impulse is persuasive in the moment. Comfort is convincing in the moment. Discipline removes the moment from the equation. It makes the decision early, when you're calm, rational, and clear. That's power. You have a choice. You can negotiate with yourself every time pressure appears, or you can decide once and follow through automatically. The second option is what disciplined people choose. They don't ask, do I feel like it today? They don't debate internally. They don't bargain with discomfort. They already decided. That's the key. Look at people who appear consistent. They're not more motivated than you. They're less emotional about decisions. They operate on rules. Rules eliminate impulse. When something is a rule, there is no discussion. There is no mood check. There is no hesitation. Action follows automatically. That's discipline. Most people avoid rules because rules feel restrictive. They think freedom means flexibility. It doesn't. Freedom comes from removing constant decision-making. Every decision drains energy. Every debate invites impulse. Every moment of maybe gives emotion a vote. Rules shut that down. You have a choice. You can decide daily, or you can decide once. Deciding daily feels flexible, but it keeps you weak. Deciding once feels rigid, but it makes you reliable. Reliability is strength. That's the key. Let's make this practical. If you decide, I'll work when I feel focused, impulse controls you. If you decide, I work at this time regardless, discipline controls you. If you decide, I won't react unless it's necessary, emotion loses access. If you decide, I don't explain myself under pressure, predictability disappears. These are not goals. They are operating rules. Rules are boring. That's why they work. Impulse thrives on novelty. Discipline thrives on repetition. You don't need their permission, not your emotions, not your circumstances. You're allowed to decide how you operate and stick to it. Most people wait for clarity after emotion hits. That never works. Clarity must come first. That's the key. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Most bad decisions are not made because people don't know better. They're made because people delay deciding until emotion takes over. When emotion arrives, logic leaves. So disciplined people remove logic from the moment. They don't think. They execute. That's why discipline looks effortless from the outside. There's no struggle because there's no debate. Debate invites impulse. Impulse always argues for comfort. Rules argue for nothing. They simply exist. That's power. You have a choice. You can keep asking yourself what you feel like doing, or you can define what you do and let feelings catch up later. Feelings always follow behavior, never the other way around. That's the key. Think about impulse control again. Impulse says, just this once. Now is different. You deserve it. Rules say, no, not emotionally, not angrily, calmly, once. And because that no was decided earlier, it doesn't require energy. Energy is conserved. Focus remains intact. That's mental toughness. Mental toughness is not intensity. It's structure. Structure removes friction. Most people live unstructured lives and wonder why they feel overwhelmed. It's because every choice feels heavy when nothing is decided in advance. Discipline lightens the load. That's the paradox. Let's address resistance. You might think rules make life rigid. They don't. They make you stable, so life doesn't knock you around. Rules don't remove freedom. They protect it. When you control your actions automatically, you stop being controlled externally. That's the trade. You have a choice. Decide how you respond to stress. Decide how you handle provocation. Decide what you do when discomfort appears. Not in the moment. Now, write it down if necessary. Repeat it daily. Discipline is memory. It remembers when emotion forgets. That's the key. And here's where many people fail. They create rules but break them the first time it's uncomfortable. That teaches the worst lesson possible. Rules are optional. Once that lesson installs, discipline collapses. Rules must be boring. Rules must be consistent. Rules must survive discomfort. Otherwise, they are wishes. You don't need perfect rules. You need enforceable ones. Simple, clear, repeatable. That's discipline. And once discipline is installed, something shifts. Impulse loses urgency. Emotion loses authority. Decision-making becomes calm. You stop feeling rushed internally. That calm is earned. But discipline alone isn't enough. Because many impulses aren't about action. They're about relief. Escape. Distraction. Numbing. And that's what we confront next. You've decided in advance. Now you must stop chasing comfort when pressure appears. That's where most people fail, which is why the next chapter matters more than they expect. Chapter 6. Stop chasing relief. Most impulses are not about pleasure. They are about relief. That distinction matters. People don't scroll because they're curious. They scroll because they're uncomfortable. People don't snack because they're hungry. They snack because they want tension to go away. People don't avoid work because it's hard. They avoid it because discomfort feels threatening. Relief is the real addiction. That's the key. Relief promises escape. Escape from pressure, escape from boredom, escape from responsibility, escape from yourself. And every time you choose relief, you weaken your ability to endure. You have a choice. You can reduce discomfort, or you can expand your capacity to tolerate it. One makes life easier temporarily. The other makes you stronger permanently. Most people never make that distinction. They confuse comfort with care. They confuse relief with rest. They are not the same. Rest restores capacity. Relief avoids demand. That's the difference. Relief teaches your nervous system a dangerous rule. When things feel hard, leave. Once that rule is learned, discipline feels like punishment. Focus feels like pain. Stillness feels unbearable. That's not because you're weak. It's because you've trained escape. That's the key. Let's say this clearly. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the training stimulus. Muscles grow under resistance. The mind grows under restraint. Every time you feel the urge to escape and you stay, something changes. You build tolerance. Tolerance is mental toughness. You don't need their permission, not your discomforts, not your urges. You are allowed to feel pressure without fixing it. That sentence alone dismantles most impulsive behavior. Because impulse exists only when you believe discomfort requires action. It doesn't. An urge rises. You feel it. You don't move. That's it. No coping mechanism. No distraction. No replacement behavior. Just presence. That's hard at first. That's why it works. That's the key. Relief-seeking makes people fragile. Fragile people become reactive. Reactive people become predictable. And predictable people are easy to control. By habits. By emotions, by other people. Stopping relief is not about suffering. It's about reclaiming agency. Agency means you decide when to move, not your nervous system. You have a choice. When boredom hits, stay. When anxiety rises, breathe and stay. When the urge to escape appears, wait. Not forever. Just long enough for the urge to lose authority. Every urge peaks. Every urge fades. Relief interrupts that cycle. Discipline completes it. That's the difference. Most people never let urges finish. They interrupt them with comfort. So the urge comes back stronger next time. That's conditioning. You don't break conditioning by fighting urges. You break it by outlasting them. That's the key. Let's be precise. This is not about denying yourself rest. Rest is intentional. Rest is planned. Rest restores. Relief is reactive. Relief is impulsive. Relief avoids. If you rest intentionally, you remain in control. If you seek relief impulsively, you lose it. That's the rule. Disciplined people don't feel less discomfort. They tolerate more of it. That's why they appear calm. Calm is not the absence of pressure. It's the presence of capacity. Capacity comes from not chasing relief. You have a choice. Every time you feel the urge to escape, ask one question. Am I resting or am I relieving? If it's relief, pause. That pause is training. That's the key. At first, staying feels tense. Your mind will argue. Your body will push. That's normal. That's the nervous system recalibrating. You're teaching it a new rule. I can stay and nothing breaks. Once that rule installs, relief loses its grip. You don't crave escape as much. You don't need distraction as often. You don't panic under pressure. That's not because life got easier. It's because you got stronger. Stop chasing relief and something unexpected happens. Discomfort stops feeling personal. Pressure stops feeling urgent. Silence stops feeling empty. You start operating instead of reacting. That's discipline. But discipline must be reinforced. It's not enough to resist once. It must become default. And default behavior is built through repetition. Which brings us to the next step. You've learned to pause. You've learned to decide in advance. You've learned to stop escaping discomfort. Now you must train restraint deliberately, like a muscle. Because impulse control is not a philosophy. It's a practice. And that's exactly what we cover next. Chapter 7. Train impulse control like a muscle. Impulse control is not a belief. It is not a mindset. It is not a personality trait. It is a muscle. And like any muscle, it grows only under resistance. That's the key. Most people think they lose control because they are weak. They're wrong. They lose control because they are untrained. No one expects strength without lifting weight. No one expects endurance without stress. Yet people expect self-control without practice. That expectation is irrational. You have a choice. You can continue hoping discipline appears when needed, or you can train it daily, deliberately. Training does not happen during easy moments. It happens during small, controlled challenges. That's where most people fail. They wait for big tests, high stress, major pressure. That's too late. By then, impulse is already dominant. Training must happen when the stakes are low. That's the key. Small restraint builds big control. Say it again. Small restraint builds big control. Every time you delay gratification, you lift the weight. Every time you tolerate boredom, you lift the weight. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you lift the weight. None of these moments feel dramatic. That's why they matter. Impulse control grows quietly. Just like discipline. You don't need their permission, not your comforts, not your habits. You are allowed to feel an urge and do nothing. That is the repetition. Let's make this practical. Choose small daily acts of restraint, not heroic ones. Boring ones. Delay checking your phone. Wait before eating. Sit with silence. Finish tasks without breaks. These are not productivity hacks. They are training drills. Each one tells your nervous system. I decide when I move. That's power. Most people quit training because they expect immediate results. That's impatience, another impulse. Impulse control trains slowly but compounds fast. After a week, urges feel slightly weaker. After a month, they lose authority. After enough repetition, restraint becomes automatic. That's when control becomes identity. That's the key. Training must be intentional. If restraint is accidental, it doesn't count. You must notice the urge. You must choose to delay. You must stay until it fades. That conscious process rewires behavior. Without awareness, habits remain unchanged. You have a choice. You can drift through urges, or you can train through them. Training is uncomfortable. That's why it works. Comfort never builds capacity. Discomfort is the stimulus. Think of impulse control like this. Every urge is a rep. Every pause is a repetition. Miss enough reps and you stay weak. Complete enough reps and control becomes effortless. That's the trade. Most people overestimate how strong they need to be and underestimate how often they need to train. You don't need extreme discipline. You need consistent restraint. That's the key. Let's address resistance again. You might think training impulse control will make life rigid or joyless. It doesn't. It makes pleasure intentional. When you choose enjoyment deliberately, it feels better. When enjoyment chooses you, it controls you. That's the difference. Training gives you range. You can enjoy when you decide. You can endure when required. That balance is maturity. Impulse-only people are one-dimensional. Disciplined people are adaptable. You have a choice. Train now or pay later. Because untrained impulses don't disappear. They escalate. What you don't control today controls you tomorrow. That's the key. Training also builds trust, not with others, with yourself. Every time you keep a small promise, self-respect grows. Every time you delay gratification, confidence stabilizes. Not emotional confidence, structural confidence. The kind that doesn't disappear under pressure. That confidence is quiet. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need approval. It knows. And that leads directly into the next discipline. Because impulse doesn't only show up in actions. It shows up in speech, talking too fast, explaining too much, reacting verbally under pressure. Silence is the next training ground, and it is far more powerful than most people realize. You've trained restraint internally. Now you must train it externally. Chapter 8. Silence breaks impulse patterns. Most people speak too fast, not because they have something important to say, but because silence makes them uncomfortable. That discomfort is impulse. Silence exposes impulse more clearly than any other situation. Because when you don't speak, there is nothing to hide behind. No explanation, no justification, no emotional release, just presence. That's why silence is powerful. That's the key. Impulse wants expression. It wants release through words. It wants to explain, defend, correct, or impress. Silence denies it all of that. And when impulse is denied expression, it weakens. You have a choice. You can speak to relieve tension, or you can stay silent and build control. Most people talk to regulate themselves. They talk to calm anxiety. They talk to protect ego. They talk to avoid being misunderstood. That's not communication. That's impulse management. And it fails. Because every impulsive word teaches your nervous system. When you feel pressure, speak. That pattern becomes automatic. Then one day you say something you can't take back. Something unnecessary. Something revealing. Silence would have prevented that. That's the key. Silence slows the nervous system. When you don't speak immediately, your body recalibrates. Breathing slows. Thoughts organize. Emotion loses intensity. Words spoken after silence carry weight. Words spoken impulsively carry regret. Watch people under pressure. The first to speak is usually the least controlled. They rush to fill space. They rush to explain. The calmer person waits. Waiting creates leverage. That's power. You don't need their permission. Not the rooms. Not the moments. You are allowed to be silent. Silence is not awkward unless you rush to escape it. And most people do. That's why silence feels threatening. It exposes who is uncomfortable with themselves. When you stay silent, others often reveal more. They talk. They justify. They overextend. You gain information without giving any away. That's the key. Silence is not passive. It is strategic restraint. Think about arguments. Most arguments escalate because both sides speak impulsively. Defensiveness meets defensiveness. Emotion feeds emotion. Silence interrupts that loop. When you don't respond immediately, the energy drops. The other person either calms or exposes themselves. Either way, you win clarity. Silence does not mean agreement. It means control. That distinction matters. In negotiations, silence creates pressure. In conflicts, silence creates space. In daily life, silence builds authority. Because people associate calm silence with confidence. Not loud confidence. Quiet confidence. That's the discipline this audiobook keeps pointing you toward. Quiet discipline. Most people fear silence because they equate it with weakness. They think not responding means losing. It doesn't. Reacting emotionally is losing. Silence preserves position. That's the key. Let's bring this back to impulse training. Silence is one of the most effective restraint drills available. When you feel the urge to respond, explain, or defend, pause. Say nothing, not forever. Just long enough for the urge to pass. That moment is training. Your body will resist. Your mind will push. That's normal. That's the impulse trying to reassert control. Stay anyway. Every time you do, impulse loses authority. You have a choice. Speak automatically and/or speak deliberately. Deliberate speech is rare. That's why it carries weight. Think before you speak is not advice. It's a discipline. And discipline requires delay. Delay is the enemy of impulse. That's the key. Silence also reveals something uncomfortable. Many people don't know why they speak. They speak out of habit. To fill space. To feel relevant. To manage perception. When you practice silence, you start noticing these patterns. Awareness increases. Once awareness increases, choice appears. You don't need to explain yourself to everyone. You don't need to respond to every comment. You don't need to clarify every misunderstanding. Clarity often arrives without your help. And if it doesn't, silence still protects you, because unnecessary speech always costs more than it gives. That's the rule. Disciplined people speak less, but better. They don't rush to be understood. They don't rush to defend identity. They let consistency speak over time. That's authority. Authority is not loud. It's stable. Stability comes from restraint. You have a choice. Train silence in small moments. Pause before replying to messages. Pause before responding emotionally. Pause before explaining yourself. Not to manipulate, to regulate. Silence regulates impulse. That's the key. At first, silence will feel tense. That tension is training. You are expanding your tolerance for internal pressure. The same pressure you use to escape through words. Now you stay. And because you stay, something changes. Your reactions slow. Your decisions sharpen. Your presence stabilizes. People notice without you saying anything. That's the paradox. Silence makes you visible. Not because you demand attention, because you no longer leak energy. Energy conserved becomes gravity. Gravity draws attention. That's quiet power. But silence alone is not the final step. Silence creates space. Space allows calm. And calm is not something you chase. It's something that appears when control is consistent. That's what we address next. You've trained impulse restraint. You've trained silence. Now we look at what emerges naturally when control becomes your default. Chapter 9. Calm is the byproduct of control. Calm is not something you force. Calm is not something you chase. Calm is not something you pretend to have. Calm is what shows up after control becomes consistent. That's the truth. Most people try to calm themselves while remaining impulsive. They breathe. They repeat affirmations. They distract themselves. It doesn't last, because calm cannot survive chaos. That's the key. Calm is not the absence of emotion. It is the absence of urgency. Urgency is created by impulse. Impulse is created by lack of restraint. Remove impulse and urgency collapses. Calm appears naturally. You have a choice. You can keep trying to feel calm, or you can build control and let calm arrive on its own. The second option works. The first one doesn't. Think about people who stay calm under pressure. They are not emotionally numb. They feel stress. They feel fear. They feel tension. But those feelings don't command them. That's the difference. Control means emotions report. They don't decide. That's the key. When impulse is untrained, emotions hijack action. When impulse is trained, emotions become background noise. Still present, but no longer loud. That's mental toughness. Mental toughness is not aggression. It's composure. It's the ability to remain internally stable while external pressure increases. That stability is built, not imagined. And it's built through everything you've practiced so far. Pausing, deciding in advance, stopping relief-seeking, training restraint, using silence. All of that produces one result. Calm, not relaxed calm. Operational calm, the kind that allows thinking. You have a choice. When pressure hits, you can add movement, or you can reduce it. Most people add movement. They talk more. They act faster. They react harder. That amplifies chaos. Controlled people reduce movement. They slow speech. They limit action. They observe. Reduction creates clarity. Clarity creates calm. That's the sequence. Calm is a signal to your nervous system that nothing is urgent. Urgency makes people sloppy. Calm makes people precise. Precision wins long term. That's the key. Notice something important. Calm people don't rush to prove themselves. They don't rush to explain. They don't rush to respond, because they are not internally threatened. Threat perception drops when impulse control rises. That's why calm feels powerful. It communicates self-sufficiency, not arrogance, not detachment, self-sufficiency. I don't need to move to feel okay. That message alone changes how people interact with you. Pressure decreases. Provocation weakens. Manipulation fails. Because there's nothing to grab onto. You have a choice. You can feed urgency, or you can starve it. Urgency feeds on immediate action. Starve it with delay. Urgency feeds on explanation. Starve it with silence. Urgency feeds on comfort seeking. Starve it with restraint. Do this consistently and calm becomes your default state. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped amplifying it internally. That's the key. Calm also reveals something else. Most problems are smaller than they feel. They feel large because emotion magnifies them. When emotion is contained, scale becomes visible. You stop catastrophizing. You stop dramatizing. You stop personalizing. not through positive thinking and through control. Calm restores proportion. That's mental clarity. Clarity allows strategy. Strategy replaces reaction. Reaction is expensive. Strategy is efficient. That's why calm people outperform emotional ones over time. Not because they care less, because they waste less energy. Energy is finite. Impulse leaks it. Control preserves it. Calm is preserved energy. That's the key. You don't need to announce calm. You don't need to show it. It's felt. People sense it in how you move, how you speak, how long you wait. Calm communicates confidence without words. That confidence is grounded, not dependent on outcomes, not dependent on approval. It comes from knowing you can handle pressure without breaking. That knowledge is earned. You have a choice. Build that knowledge daily, or stay dependent on circumstances. Circumstances change, control remains. Calm also changes how you experience time. When you're impulsive, time feels urgent. When you're controlled, time feels available. Availability creates patience. Patience is rare, and rare qualities create advantage. Calm people wait better. They choose better moments. They avoid unnecessary battles. They conserve. That's discipline in action. But calm alone is not the finish line. Calm is the result. Identity is the destination. Because once control becomes automatic, you are no longer practicing discipline. You are disciplined. That shift matters. It's the difference between effort and default, and that's where we end. You've trained impulse control. You've built restraint. You've earned calm. Now you must make it permanent. Now you become non-reactive by default. That's the final step. Chapter 10. Become non-reactive by default. Non-reactive is not something you do. It is something you become. That difference matters. If you are trying to be non-reactive, you are still negotiating with impulse. If you are non-reactive, impulse no longer has authority. That's the final shift. Most people think self-control is effort. They believe discipline is constant resistance. They imagine a lifelong battle. That's not how it ends. The end state is not struggle. The end state is default. That's the key. At first, control is conscious. You pause deliberately. You restrain intentionally. You stay alert. Over time, repetition changes structure. What once required effort becomes automatic. What once felt tense becomes normal. What once demanded focus becomes identity. That's how training works. You have a choice. You can stay someone who tries to control impulses, or you can become someone who doesn't react by default. The second option is quieter, stronger, more stable. Non-reactive does not mean passive. It means selective. You still act. You still decide. You still move. But you move when you decide, not when emotion pushes. That's control. A non-reactive person is not slow. They are deliberate. They don't rush emotionally. They don't explain impulsively. They don't escape discomfort reflexively. They operate. That's the identity this audiobook has been conditioning you toward. And conditioning is the right word. Because everything you've practiced has been rewiring defaults. Defaults are what happen when you are tired, when you are stressed, when no one is watching. That's who you really are. You don't rise to your ideals under pressure. You fall to your defaults. That's the key. Most people build goals. Few people build defaults. Goals inspire. Defaults decide outcomes. By now, you understand the process. Pause replaced reaction. Rules replaced negotiation. Restraint replaced relief. Silence replaced impulse. Calm replaced urgency. These are not techniques anymore. They are patterns, and patterns form identity. You have a choice. You can return to old defaults, or you can protect the new ones. Because defaults decay without reinforcement. Non-reactive does not mean careless. It means maintained. The disciplined mind never assumes it is done. It stays alert without being tense. That balance is mastery. Let's be clear. You will still feel emotion. You will still feel pressure. You will still feel urges. Non-reactive does not mean numb. It means emotion no longer dictates behavior. That's the line. Feelings inform. They do not command. That rule must stay intact. Once you allow emotions to command again, even occasionally, old patterns return. Not immediately, but gradually. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. You don't need heroic restraint. You need boring reliability. That's discipline at the identity level. You don't need their permission, not your emotions, not your pasts. You are allowed to change who you default to being. That's not pretending. That's training completed. A non-reactive person has a different internal dialogue. They don't say, I must respond. They say, I can respond later. They don't say, this is unbearable. They say, this will pass. They don't say, I need relief. They say, I can hold. That language matters. Language reinforces identity. Identity reinforces behavior. That's the loop you want. Not impulse, action, regret. But awareness, restraint, control. That's the upgrade. Notice something else. Non-reactive people are difficult to manipulate. Not because they are suspicious, but because they are slow to move emotionally. Pressure loses effectiveness. Provocation loses leverage. Urgency loses credibility. When nothing rushes you internally, nothing rushes you externally. That's power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't need recognition. It just operates. And that brings us to the final responsibility. Once you become non-reactive, you are accountable. You can no longer blame emotion. You can no longer blame impulse. You can no longer blame habit. You decide. That level of responsibility scares many people because it removes excuses. But it also removes helplessness. Helplessness is expensive. Control is efficient. You have a choice. Remain someone who reacts and explains, or become someone who decides and moves on. The second path is quieter, less dramatic, more effective. Most people won't notice it immediately. They'll just notice that you don't get pulled into chaos anymore, that you don't rush, that you don't overextend. Over time, they adjust, because people always adjust to stability. Stability sets the frame, and framing is leadership, whether you want that role or not. Non-reactive people lead without trying, because others feel safer around control. That's human nature. Now, one final truth you must carry forward. Non-reactive does not mean never acting. It means acting from clarity. Sometimes action is required. Sometimes speed matters, but speed chosen consciously is not impulse. That distinction matters. You are not here to slow life down unnecessarily. You are here to stop being rushed by it. That's the balance. So here is your final challenge. Not as motivation, as instruction. Every day, choose one moment to not react. One urge to delay. One impulse to observe. Not to test yourself, to maintain yourself. Because maintenance is mastery, you don't need to change everything. You need to protect what you've built. Control is fragile if neglected. Power fades if unused. Use it daily, quietly, consistently, without announcing it. That's the discipline. That's the identity. That's the end of training and the beginning of operation. You are no longer learning control. You are living it. Stay non-reactive. Stay disciplined. Stay deliberate. That is how you keep your life in your hands. Every impulsive action weakens your position. Every restrained action strengthens it. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer reactions, fewer excuses, fewer emotional decisions. From this moment forward, your task is simple. Pause before you act. Delay before you decide. Choose discipline over relief. Do this daily, especially when it feels uncomfortable. Control your impulses, and nothing external will control you again. The training starts now.